Hello and welcome to the Gifted Ed podcast. I am your host, Meghan McCarthy, clinical social worker. We are grateful for the opportunity to share this space with you today as we talk about the complexities of giftedness. Today, we welcome Sunshine Echevarria and Jennifer Marvel-Gillono as we discuss their approach to designing curricular units that honor the needs of our gifted learners. Sunshine currently teaches first grade. She has a master's in technology and education. She holds an elementary education license with an endorsement of gifted education.
I just love when I hear them make connections to each other, no matter which unit we're in social studies. But if I hear them making connections with each other about what we're talking about, that is so important.
Sunshine is also an early education generalist national board certified teacher since 2013. Her particular interests include teaching critical and creative thinking, as well as developing learning units which incorporate multiple curricular areas. Jennifer currently teaches 5th and 7th grade social studies. She has a master's in education in curriculum and development. She holds an elementary education license with additional endorsements in middle school language arts and social studies, as well as in gifted education.
All of these things really tie together so that we're sending our students out into the world as they enter high school with the skills that they're going to need to have to be successful.
She's interested in the use of critical thinking and research skills to enliven the past for students as they uncover the significance of historical events through primary and secondary source analysis. Welcome to the Gifted Ed podcast, Sunshine and Jennifer.
Hi, it's so great to be here.
Thank you for having us.
So I'm very excited by this conversation, and I'd love to get started by getting a better sense of how you approach designing curricular units. Sunshine, can you walk us through the key components that you work to incorporate when designing a unit?
Absolutely. So that is actually the best part, the most fun part, I believe, of my job. So the most important thing to know is that I'm a kid at heart and I want to have fun when I'm teaching. And so when I'm starting to think about a new unit that I want to teach, the ideas start to bubble at first. And typically this happens outside of the classroom. So whether it's on my commute, whether it's in the summer, whether it's after school, little ideas start to bubble and brew in my mind. Beginning with connecting to something that we're already doing or ideas that the children have come up with. And then I start to think about how those connect with things that we already do. And so then what I'll do is I will begin to piece things together, trying to figure out how to incorporate and connect as many of the curricular areas as I can with social studies. So the primary areas that I teach are reading, think tank, which is critical and creative thinking, writing as well, and executive functioning. And so I try to piece together as many of those areas as I can into that social studies unit as possible. And then it just becomes fast and furious in my head. It gets really noisy in there. But the most important thing is that I'm a kid at heart. I want to have fun and put that together for the children. And so that's how I piece it together and make it happen.
And I guess the thing I kind of heard from the very beginning, the basis of it is kid interests.
Absolutely.
And your interest as well, because you're going to bring that excitement to it. But that's kind of the free idea when you're driving in the summer, when you're not focused on the exact curricular modules you're going to hit, more of just what naturally comes to mind when you're thinking of what do kids want.
Absolutely. And trying to fill in those gaps as well, things that might be missing in the curriculum that we already have.
Yeah.
What are we missing? What are some key components that I want to make sure that we're filling for the students that we have?
Interesting. And then obviously anything that embeds executive functioning naturally within it, the writing component naturally within it, is a huge piece.
Absolutely.
And then that brings us, Jennifer, since you're in middle school, what are the research skills that are essential for your students that you're constantly refining during various projects within the middle school setting?
So we look at 4 main areas when we're starting off our middle school students in 5th grade that we can continue to build upon. Sourcing, corroboration, closed reading, and contextualization. First, before we get to those, however, we talk a lot about where do you even start your research. So although in the primary grades, students have done a lot of research, so they're coming in, they're already excited, they know what this is all about, They oftentimes have been given materials by their teachers that have been vetted on the things that they're going to research about. Whereas the difference with middle school is we start to have them do a lot more researching on their own about topics that we might not necessarily be experts on, because we're trying to let them go as far as they can go with their research. So we start with that, like, where do you start your research? And then looking heavily at your sources. Are they reliable? Who has created them? When were they created? Then we go on to corroboration. A great moment is when a student comes up to you and says, well, this source told me one thing and this other source told me something else. Who's correct? And then it's like, okay, well, we need to corroborate. Where did you get your information? Are we sure it's reliable? Maybe we need to look at a third source. And then we go on to, what are all of those claims of the author? What evidence are they using? What language are they using? Really reading for that depth, which our gifted students love because they want to follow things down rabbit holes all the time. And so that is always helpful for them. And then putting it in context. What else was going on at the time? What else is happening? How does this fit in with more of a global perspective than maybe just that small incident? And then how does that affect things into the future? All of these things are great examples, too, about creating differentiation for students, because even though our students are gifted, they're all still at their own level, and they also have their own level of knowledge about their topic. And this is a place where kids can really just go as far as that research will take them. So some kids might just be doing what the assignment requires, and some kids, this may be the path to a lifelong love of something that they've discovered in their studies.
But what I'm hearing is, regardless of what path, right, like how deep they dive, it still seems like the critical thinking skill is there regardless, because of the sources that they have to divide through. Like, that's still a piece that's huge throughout the projects as well, which I know comes back to like the love of learning that you have in terms of research projects, but just that critical thinking piece is consistent through it all.
Constantly analyzing all of that information that they're looking at. And you know it's really starting to work when you might present them something in a lesson that's not necessarily research-based, and they're starting to ask those questions organically. Well, where did you get this? Well, where, when was it written? What else was happening at the time? And that will just take you in so many other directions. But it's because they have really embedded that critical thinking into how they're viewing all of the other things that you're doing in the classroom.
And I'm excited because I think this ties really well, Sunshine, into, I want to hear more. I think you just finished up a toy unit, and I would love to hear more about how that went, and if you could just kind of walk us through that.
Sure. So the toy unit actually evolved many years ago when I looped from kindergarten to first grade. And we realized that kindergarten and first grade were teaching the same winter holidays. And so something needed to change. And so what I wanted to do was ask kids to start to think about something that was important at holiday time that was different. And so we started to talk about traditions in a different way. And how this unit evolved was in the form of interviews. So I had the children ask their family members about a toy that they had when they were little and what made that toy important. So this was drawing into social studies, but in a different way. And it incorporated listening, it incorporated speaking, because they came back and reported on that. But then over time, this unit just became more and more involved. And so this year, this is kind of how this unit has changed. So the children are asked to interview someone who hopefully lives a little bit further away and is at least one generation removed. And so we had students interviewing people as far away as India. I think we had somebody who was in Africa this year, someone in South America, a few in South America this year, and a few in Canada. And what we're finding is that the toys that are connecting these family members are not the toys that are big or that are expensive or that are tech dependent, but these are toys that are imaginative or that are creative or that stand the test of time. Now, unfortunately, toys are starting to creep in that were part of my childhood, like the Cabbage Patch doll, which is not so fun for me. But we are coming into some pretty neat things. So, for example, this year, one student brought in a game called Kuti Kuti, which we had never heard of. Yeah. None of us had, but we learned how to play it. I ordered the parts to it. All of the children now know how to play it. They brought the pieces home and were able to teach their families. We learned that Lincoln logs historically have a tie to a famous architect and have connections with that. We learned that a family member enjoyed playing with yo-yos, and so we learned yo-yo tricks. We learned about marbles, how to play marbles accurately, but then in Think Tank, we learned new ways to play marbles based on our own rules. But all in all, we learned that over 60% of our family members still have the toy that was near and dear to their hearts when they were young, which is pretty incredible. Yeah. Because then the question to the students was, when you think about what you're hoping for the holidays, is it something that is also going to stand the test of time? Is it something that's long-lasting? Is it something that's imaginative and creative as well? Or is it something that's more throwaway, right? Is it something that's long-lasting and enduring? So it's just something that makes them think a little bit more about that. We also placed what their families loved when they were little. We placed those on our timeline that we keep in our classroom.
Oh, okay.
So they can see where they stand in time.
Yeah.
And then we also have some toys such as Pong, yo-yos, slinkies, marbles, roller skates. We also place those on our timeline as well so that they can see those toys in relationship to other things that we've talked about. This timeline also holds things like publication dates of books that we read in class and the timeline of other major events, even things like when school started and our birthdays and the teacher's birthday and fables that we read and things like that. So everything's on there. Other connections in this unit, we sing the song My Favorite Things by Julie Andrews. And we do that with the lyrics on the board. So that's just getting choral reading in. At first, they think I'm a little silly by putting that up there. But by the end, they are all singing it. But in the last few days of the unit, I changed the words to the song to the words of toys that their family members liked. Really cool. They're not expecting it, but then they are so into it and sing it with the new words. And then in literacy, we read a book called Too Many Toys, which is a book by David Shannon, a very popular author. It's about a little boy whose mom is fed up because he just has way too many toys. But in the end, when they're cleaning them up and he finally agrees, yes, we can get rid of a lot of toys, and mom's ready to take the box of toys out, she realizes they've been dumped out because he's using the box as a toy. And so then we talk about, well, can you use a box as a toy? And in our classroom, we have lots of makerspace type items, so the children can use those items to make their own toys. So we do that in a think tank activity as well. And then as a wrap up to the entire unit, all of the items are mapped on Google Earth so the children can fly around Google Earth and see them all in relationship to each other. Their houses are also planted on Google Earth so they can see that as well. And then finally, a copy of the whole presentation in Google Slides goes home with their homework at the end, where they try to share those connections with their families and just kind of, wrap it up with their families. And hopefully it ties back and they can share some of that, getting that listening and speaking back into the final presentation as well.
And the pride they take in that, I'm sure, is tremendous.
They get very excited. Yeah. It's just hard when, because you can only fit so many of their presentations in each day, so then it's hard when they have to wait.
Yes.
For their turn. Which is a skill, too. But that is a skill on its own. So sometimes we'll sneak in a few extra here and there, even if it isn't time for social studies. But it is exciting for them. It is exciting for me for them to ask for social studies when it isn't social studies time. And it's exciting for me because as a child, social studies was my least favorite. I mean, bottom, least favorite. And so for my students to ask for it is important for me. It's huge.
Don't you think that one of the reasons why they're asking for it is because you've done such a great job of really connecting it to something that they understand and care about? It's not just this thing that we learn about and we can't connect it to our own lives. I think you're really getting at the heart of how does this connect to their life, and it's providing them an opportunity to reach out to other generations and other family members to really drive that sense of like family identity and community home.
I hope so. I sure hope so. And I just love that when I hear them make connections to each other, no matter which unit we're in social studies, but if I hear them making connections with each other about what we're talking about, that is so important, because in the end, isn't that what social studies?
The heart.
Right.
Yeah.
And as they move up in the grades and we're expanding outward from just the classroom or the school or their small community, and we're starting to look at the state and the country and the world, we are so interconnected. I mean, this really is a global society that these kids are entering into. And we're not even sure where it'll go from here. So this really does lay some good foundation, and just having them open their eyes to that we're all part of this bigger global universe.
When I think you probably are only exposed to like the pebble hitting the water, right? But I think the orientation you give them in time and then being able to see it in a timeline is tremendous, because that in and of, days and time goes by so fast for us as adults, let alone kids. I mean, their concept of like what day of the week it is sometimes is off, right? So in terms of seeing it year to year and how that plays out is huge. I think also just they could pick up a book the next year and it be set in some place in South Africa, and they're like, oh yeah, last year in first group, right? So those are pieces that I don't even think teachers necessarily see, because they're not yours they've moved on from that point. But I think there's such foundational pieces. I know, Jennifer, you were talking about that we don't even know the ripple effects of a project like this. But I think because you've hit it in so many, lyrical music too, right? When you we hope that kids will benefit from all parts of the dimensions that you build into it. But even if they just get one or two, that's tremendous, because kids are their brains are all different, and they're going to connect to projects so differently. But I think that's such a neat way to bring in, my goodness, so many different skill sets and dimensions that I think will only serve them in the long run and push them too. Even to ask them to say like, okay, so Hanukkah, Christmas, holidays are coming up. How does this impact what you're asking for, is even a push like in the moment to even take a step back. And if that doesn't hit them, something else in the next year or two when they're reading a book or doing a project, playing marbles, right? Doing something like that will hit. So I think that's such an amazing project that I'm happy that you shared with us. And then, Jennifer, I know you kind of hit on this some, but can you share some of the long-term impacts that units like this have on students as they eventually, and the students that you eventually teach then in middle school?
So one of our strengths here at our school definitely has been that ability to build on each other's work through the years, in social studies especially, since we are doing things that have a research component every year. I have kids coming into my classroom, and when I'm introducing things, they automatically recognize, oh, this is like when we did the toy project, or this is when we did research on colonial jobs that they might have done in second grade. And they're making those connections right away. And then we're adding another layer to it. For example, maybe they write down where they or who they interviewed for the toy project. But then in another year, they might be writing down the sources from books that they had gathered of where they had gotten information. So then by the time they get into middle school, we can do things like writing annotated bibliographies where they have to justify how they're using the materials. So we're just layering it on year by year. Timelines. Most first grade teachers might not think that the timeline could have so much impact that it might be too complicated. But that's really not the case, and you've proven that. I've seen the timeline, which I love, because when they come into the middle school, they have that already embedded into their heads, and they already have that sense of, where am I in the scope of the timeline with all of these things that we've been talking about? So those are great ways that we can just continue layering on the presentation skills that are happening, where they're going and talking to their families. By the time they come to me, we currently are doing a project on archaeology, where they have researched something in the world that has had significance. It's something that people still go back to in research. We've done all kinds of things, from caves to the Great Wall of China to Mesa Verde. And after they're done researching and they're ready to present to the community, they're asking me about, can we write speeches? How long can they be? Because that foundational piece has already happened at such early grades that by the time they're 10, I want to write a speech. Now, they want to write 10 and 15-minute speeches that maybe are too long for their presentations, but it's because they started doing it so young that it doesn't seem like it's a challenge that they can't overcome.
Mm-hmm. And I've even actually just met with a sixth grader they're wrapping up the architecture fair right now, right?
Yes.
And they had to do presentations today. And so last week we started kind of talking through, because that brought upon some anxiety. And they're referencing projects they did in second and third grade,
right,
and how they got through those. And so they even are seeing the layered effect from like the social emotional aspect, right, of presenting in front of staff, or in front of peers. So I think we don't know how these projects impact, but I mean, we can kind of list through so many, but I just think it's a tremendous part of the program to be able to layer on year and year, and what the kids get from it each year is remarkable.
They come into class excited, saying, when do I get to do the archaeology project? When do I get to do the architecture project?
Yeah.
They've heard about them. They're excited. They're coming in. And that goes back to keeping that level of excitement about social studies alive. Mm-hmm. Some kids have come in and said, I've already been reading about whatever topic they've chosen, because they want to get a head start on it. So it's exciting as teachers to have them coming in and being so enthusiastic and motivated to just dive into their topic as much as they can.
And I think what's neat is, over the years, there's some that we still have, each grade level has some sort of pillar, some sort of project, but teachers have the ability and kids have the ability to update it and modify it, to differentiate it for that year's class, for the year's needs. But yet you still have that backbone of what kids can expect from year to year. Like, I think it's important to have that balance, which I feel like you guys hit really well.
Right. And really the point is for them to be doing research every year. So it's not so much about the subject matter. It's about all of the skills that they're getting. I mean, we're sending kids into a world that's unknown to us right now. Yeah. And them being able to critically think, to be able to figure out what is true and what is maybe made up for the internet for themselves is really going to be crucial for them to be well-rounded citizens. So this work that we're doing has a much bigger impact than maybe even just an assignment for today or an assignment for next year. It really has to do with helping them become citizens who can make sense of the world and look at information and really understand it and be able to source it, put it in context, and
Well, and earlier you had used the word justify a few times. And even in first, we use that term often, where we ask them questions, but then we ask them to justify it. And we use the word justify often. So even in Think Tank this morning, we were looking at pictures of silly animals, and we said, what do you think would be a good alternative name for this? But then justify why. And so justify. So, always thinking critically about what you're saying and backing it up is definitely something that's...
The why is even more important sometimes than just like what they see as the answer You've
Correct.
got to always say, well, how do you know? Well, how do you know?
How do you know?
And that brings up another good point about language. A lot of the language that we're using across the grade levels is consistent so that the kids have an expectation of, I'm going to understand what the teacher's talking about, but also they're going to understand what the teacher's talking about because they've heard those things before and those foundations have been laid at an early age.
Absolutely.
One of the other things we try to do at the middle school level is we think about where are they going when they leave us? So what are they going to be expected to do in high school and in college? And that's one of the things that has driven a lot of the research that we've done with kids. So we do a History Day capstone in 8th group, but it was all of the other teachers along the way that get them to that point where they can do original research, where they're getting outside sources, they're getting library sources, and they're tying it all together to answer a question that they've come up with related to a theme that's done all over the country by lots and lots of schools for the National History Day competition. So all of these things really tie together so that we're sending our students out kind of into the world as they enter high school with the skills that they're going to need to have to be successful.
So as we talked through various dimensions of different curricular units, I'm wondering if you can walk us through the scope of projects and focuses in our social studies curriculum throughout the years.
Sure. Well, a lot of how we plan our social studies actually goes back to the roots of our school. So our school was actually founded in a home, and there was a big focus on home and the idea of it being nurturing and you developing the things that you're going to need to go out in the world from your family and your surroundings. So when we start looking at our social studies curriculum, we started looking at how do we start with the core of the child and then build out from there. So for example, in kindergarten, there is a big focus on how they operate within their classroom, who their families are, and then they get in a little bit into who are your community helpers and, how do we get the things that we need within our own community for ourselves. So the focus is still very child-centered, but they're 5. So this is very appropriate for
Their world is,
5-year-olds. And then as we move into first grade, we expand out a little bit and they do units on the history of our school. And what does it mean to be part of that larger school community? And they do projects on mapping. Where do they live? Where does that fit in the world? They do mapping of our school. How do you get from place to place? And from there, then they build a town where they actually practice buying and selling things and having all the things that you would need. In second group, they go a little bit further. They talk about the larger communities where they live and how that connects with the communities around them. Moving into third grade, we talk more about Chicagoland in general because we do live in a very large metropolitan area. And then they start talking about the entire state of Illinois and how the government works and how the government affects how people live because of services and citizen responsibility. Then by the time they get into fourth group, they're covering the United States and a little bit of that early history and how did we become the country that we are. Fast forward to middle school, and I start talking with them about who are the people in your neighborhood, meaning what is Mexico? What is Canada? How does that relate to how we live in the United States? How are those our global partners, trade partners, how we have similar cultures, how we have similar governments? And then from there, we really just expand out into studying different parts of the world, whether it be in modern times or things that happened historically that affect us today. And then we actually come in a little bit. For 7th and 8th grades, we focus on the United States. And it can be things like, how did we become a country? But it also is things like, how did we become a global leader? And how are we involved in things that have happened worldwide? So we kind of have that inward look again, and then we expand it back outward as we're preparing them to leave for high school.
And just that, bringing it back to just their orientation of themselves as a global citizen and where they want to fit into that is really remarkable too.
Well, and now we have so many students who travel pretty extensively. So they're bringing all of those experiences into the classroom, and they know a lot about a lot of the world. And also with the use of technology, they might be watching videos of people from another country doing dances or, the latest in global fashion, all of the things that they might be interested in. So they are certainly global citizens, and they bring those experiences and that information to the classroom. So we have to be mindful of that, and we have to be responsive to that.
Thank you, both Sunshine and Jennifer, for sharing your time and your gifts with us. We're so grateful for your experience and your expertise today. And obviously, our students are just the luckiest to have both of you as teachers.
Thank you.
This was fun. It's always nice to talk with others about their work.
So as we close out today, we wanted to leave you with a reflection question. And that is, how can you take elements of today's conversation and embed them into your classroom units? And our call to action is we just walked through ways to increase student engagement and ownership through innovative curricular units. What new unit can you try in your classroom, or what current unit can you tweak to increase your students' ownership and excitement in a unit? We want to thank you for joining us in this space today. Please subscribe to the Gifted Ed podcast to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Stay tuned for our next episode that continues to unpack the complexities of giftedness.